So, we're on. This week we've got Mr. Nicholas Bowman-Scargill with us from Fears Watches. Fears Watches are a fascinating company based out of Bristol in England with a astonishing amount of history and heritage. What I'd like to do now is bring Nicholas into the conversation. Nicholas, welcome, mate. Thank you for making the trip up north on a dreary February day.
It's a proper February day in Britain, isn't it?
Mate.
It's wonderful. But thank you for inviting me up. It's great to come to this part of the country.
Pleasure. So I think we first crossed paths, mate, at one of Mr. Cochrane's events a few years back.
I think it was a birthday party.
Was it?
Well, I went along to it thinking it was an event and then found out it was a rather significant birthday for him.
Yes.
And it was only halfway through. I suddenly went to him and said, "Oh, happy birthday." He's like, "Shh, no one's meant to know."
Yeah, that's him all over, mate.
Exactly.
That's him all over. So yeah, we cut amongst the bazaars down there for a little while, and I think we peeled off at the end of the night and had some beers and
Absolutely.
a bite to eat and sort of got to know each other there. But you've been on your own path for quite a while now, mate. If you don't mind, could you educate us in Fears, in the story, in the inception? And,
Certainly. I mean, Fears it's a story of two parts. So Fears is one of Britain's oldest watch companies. So we've got the story from 1846 to 1976.
Yep.
And then there's the second chapter, which is the story today from 2016 when I brought the company back to life. So
Yep.
I'll do a kind of overview of the first bit
Yes.
and then explain how the second bit links to that. But I'm very open about the fact that 39 years, Fears was dormant. We were quiet. And too often people try to gloss over that. And I'm like, no, that was what was happening to British industry. Lots of family businesses were closing in the 70s. So let's, not celebrate, but acknowledge that happened.
Yeah.
So 1846 in Bristol on Redcliffe Street, which is in the heart of the old city, a young 21-year-old watchmaker, Edwin Fear, started a workshop. He'd done an apprenticeship just outside of Bristol and then came and set up, and he had the workshop on the ground floor, also a small showroom, and lived above it with his wife. Now, we don't know exactly what day he started the company. You're desperate to know what's the anniversary day. Everyone wants to know their birthday.
Of course.
The most we know is that in August 1846, he was down on the marriage registry as watchmaker, Redcliffe Street. So we know it was some point before August we celebrate the anniversary. Anyway, sets up this business and it thrives. So much so that a few years later, he moves it to Bristol Bridge around the corner, which really is the heart of the commerce in Bristol. And it continues to grow. Now, he dies in the 1870s. And his son, Amos Daniel Fear, has to wait a few years before he comes of age to be able to become managing director.
Wow.
So back in Victorian England, you had to be 21 to run a company. Okay. And so in those intervening years, Edwin's widow, Charlotte, runs the business. So back in Victorian Britain, Fears was run by a woman, which I think is wonderfully progressive. When you think back then that, that was just not done.
Absolutely not. No, it's wow. Wow.
So young Amos Daniel takes over.
Yeah.
They all head off to Weston-super-Mare for the day to celebrate. There's a wonderful photograph of the whole company in their top hats and bowler hats looking very miserable on the beach. In that very Victorian style where you weren't meant to have a smile or show any personality.
Of course. Yeah.
So he runs the business. Now, this is where the second generation really grabs it and runs with it. So put it this way, when Edwin died, Amos Daniel was actually traveling around the US looking for business opportunities. And this is around the same time Patek was doing the same thing,
Wow, okay.
So very quickly they're going, no, we may be based in Bristol, but actually there's a world outside of there.
Yeah.
And so, before the Second World War, they'd grown the business to be exporting to 95 countries around the world. They had 100 watchmakers in Bristol. They had a satellite offices and premises in both Manchester and Birmingham. This was a significant watch company. It was the largest watch manufacturer in the west of England. And people always know of Smiths, right?
Yes, of course.
Fears was actually founded 5 years before Smiths and closed 5 years after Smiths. So it's very interesting, very different histories, but, in that same period. Anyway, after he's done his 50 years working at Fears, Amos Daniel retires in the late 20s. He dies at the beginning of the 30s. And his son, Amos Reginald Fear, takes over. And he takes over, and immediately you have the Wall Street crash, the Great Depression.
Of course.
And during the 30s, Fears actually went bankrupt twice. But each time they restructured and came out from the ashes. And by the end of the 30s, they were thriving. They were doing incredibly well. You know, this was a period where Fears was watchmaker to the Admiralty. You know, it was very much a thriving British business. And then the Second World War came. And Bristol, as people may know, after London, was incredibly badly hit in the Bristol Blitz.
Yeah.
And at this point, Fears had multiple premises around the city, and they all took direct hits, some of them multiple times. And by the end of the war, the business was, you know, still there just, and they moved up to Clifton, away from the city centre, into a townhouse. Again, workshops at the top, premises for people to live, but also a showroom. And the business rebuilt. By the 50s, it was back to exporting around the world, doing the same in the 60s. But when he came to retire, you'd naturally assume his son would take over. He'd fought during the war. He'd been in the Navy. He'd seen the world. He didn't want to just work for the family business back in Bristol. Why would you want to do that?
Yeah.
So what he did was go and get a job working for Imperial Tobacco.
Okay.
Imperial products are still in Bristol today.
Yeah.
And so he did that. And so the business ended up, you know, struggling along, and then eventually was wound down. And by 1976, it was done. It closes.
Okay. So we're referring to these ladies and gentlemen in the story thus far, but these are your ancestors as well.
Oh, yes. Yes. Here is the good part.
Yes. So we're referring to great grandparents?
Yes. My Edwin Fear was my great-great-great-grandfather.
Wow.
Which is a bit of a tongue twister.
Somewhat, yeah, but it's in the blood.
Yes.
Very much so. So we got to the 70s. Obviously, we had a massive issue with the quartz crisis. Generally speaking, British manufacturing was struggling,
Exactly.
not only in watchmaking, but across the board.
Yes.
I think we lost something like 2 million jobs overnight, more or less. That happened in towns and villages and cities up and down this island, everywhere. So after that sort of wind down, the company lay dormant for 39
years.
39 years. And then you decided, right, okay, let's start the engines again. Let's go.
Yes and no. I'm going to, you know, for anyone who is not wanting to waste their time looking at my LinkedIn, I'll give you a very brief background to me, because it's one of those cases of you do lots of different things, thinking, why am I doing all these different things? And then one day you end up restarting and running a watch company and realize that, thank goodness, I did lots of different things. So I've always been very interested in business, and I did a degree in economics, pure economics. Bit of an economics geek. I'm always fascinated by it and the sort of psychology behind it. I did an internship with Deutsche Bank. I was going to become an investment banker for the simple reason that, you know, again, it was business, economics, it interests me, but also bankers get bonuses. Bonuses buy watches. You know, since I was a teenager, I was into watches.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm 37 now. So if you do the math, when I was a teenager in the early noughties, you know, there was one or two watch magazines. There was no Hodinkee. There were no podcasts. You know, there were forums. But going on the internet in the early noughties was, you know, certainly as a teenager, you were allowed to go on maybe for 30 minutes once every other evening. You know, there wasn't broadband. You know, it was so, you know, to read about watches meant going to WH Smith's, and they were always putting the watch magazines on the top shelf next to the pornos. It was just this weird, geeky thing. So they were like, oh, we'll stick it up there. We'll stick it up there next to, you know, Playboy and the like. Which, of course, as, you know, a young teenage boy is very embarrassing when you're like, look, people are looking at you and you look like you're reaching up to pick up, you know. Anyway, I'd always been into watches. And so, you know, become a banker. I can buy watches. This would be great. Slight problem. I graduated in July 2008.
Oh, dear God.
Yes. So for any of the younger audience, yes, 2008 was not a year to try and get into the financial world.
No. Yeah. I actually, on a side note on that, I remember coming into Amsterdam in Holland, and my cousin met me there. She'd married a Dutch fella years before, and the ship came in, and she came up the jetty to meet me, and she was like, "Oh, the UK has just gone into a recession. Did you know?" I was like, "No, I had no idea." But that's more or less exactly the same time. And yeah, that was not the time.
I mean, it was the first time that the business news made the front page. You know, I always remember, because having studied economics, you'd always have to go to the back pages, and just before sport would be a page about business. And now business was the front page. I didn't get my job at Deutsche, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm not the brightest guy in the room, so no, I wasn't getting that job. Anyway, I needed a job. I was moving to London, you know, and so I'm looking around, and I was very lucky to get a job in consumer PR, public relations. And it was a great job. I was there for 3 years. I worked on things like the Olympic 50p.
Wow.
Do you remember those, where members of the public signed that?
Yeah.
I was involved in that, and, you know, all kinds of crazy projects. But I had a couple of issues. One is I'm very dyslexic. So actually, writing press releases, presentations, it's not my forte.
Okay.
The other thing is you would work so hard to launch something. And then the day it's launched, it's done, close it, move on to the next thing. And I just was getting frustrated with putting so much effort in and there being literally nothing left after it, except for some newspaper cuttings, which I know is my job working in public relations.
Yeah.
But it just felt like, no, I want to do something with my hands, you know, not just, you know, sat in front of a computer all day.
Yeah.
By the way, you know, spoiler alert, what do I do nowadays as a managing director? I sit in front of a computer on my phone all the day. So, you know, more fool me. Anyway, I remember Christmas time, I was with my in-laws, with my husband, and I was saying, right, if I could do anything in the world, what would it be? Blank sheet of paper. And it came down to two things, my two passions in life since I was a kid: watches, so become a watchmaker, or trains and become a train driver. And I started researching it, working out, and I decided that actually watchmaking I really liked the idea of that. Like, you know, it isn't shift work, you're not having to relocate to different parts of the country. And I was like, no, actually, you know, that would be for me. So I wrote off a 2-page covering letter with my CV to all the big watch brands who had workshops in the United Kingdom saying, hey, so degree in economics, internship at Deutsche, 3 years in consumer public relations. I think you should take me on as an apprentice. I think I'm perfect for it. And amazingly, after 7 months of interviews and practical assessments, Rolex eventually gave in. And I started as an apprentice watchmaker at Rolex in 2011.
Wow.
So I start there. I'm in their London head office.
Yep.
Absolutely wonderful. And I mean, everyone has an opinion on Rolex.
Yeah.
But I've worked for and in the Crown for 5 years. I have so much respect for them. They are a very misunderstood company because they're very private, but internally they're actually very humble.
Yes.
They're just very much isolationist. You know?
Yes.
While the rest of the industry zigs, they zag. They just are, you know, and so some people see that as arrogance, but I don't see that. You see, you know, the quality of the product is phenomenal. The way they operate is second to none. It's just an incredible business. And I was enjoying working there. It was wonderful. I mean, you know, if you're wanting to start out in the watch industry, could you get better than getting an apprenticeship at Rolex?
Straight in at the top floor, aren't you? Really?
Exactly. And also in their head office in London. So, you know, I got to meet all kinds of celebrities and royalty coming in to pick up watches. Yeah, it was just incredible. Anyway, I'm really enjoying the job. And then about 2.5 years in, I have my regular annual catch up with the pension advisor. Now, Rolex pension, very good, very generous. So that's great. But he makes that classic pension advisor joke as the meeting finishes. You know, he looks at the paperwork as he says goodbye to me and goes, "Oh, only 39 more years to go." Ha ha ha. And we have a chuckle on that, you know. And I start walking downstairs back to the workshop. I start thinking, oh heck, I've actually got 39 more years sat at the same workbench doing exactly the same job day in, day out. And don't get me wrong, this is an incredible job.
Yes.
Very, very fulfilling. I mean, you know that. Making something, repairing something, you know, using your hands, you can't get better than that.
Of course.
But I was like, I just think there's more.
Yeah.
I just think I can do more and I want to do more. And I went home a few weekends later and I'd spent those weeks feeling very out of sorts. You know, when you suddenly feel like, you know, the moment when you're told Santa Claus isn't real. Everything that you thought and believed, it feels like you're, you know, in the Matrix. You're just coming out and suddenly looking at the whole world separately, you know, from above. And I'm talking to my parents. I'm saying, look, I know I did a degree in economics, didn't go into banking. Then I worked in PR and then I've changed it. I know I've done all these career changes, but I think it's time for me to maybe do my own thing. I have no money, but I want to do my own thing. But I had no idea what industry it would be in. It was more, I think I need the blue sky. I need to be able to achieve based on my ability, but I can also fail. You know, I think that's the biggest thing people don't realize when you run a business is, yes, you can achieve incredible things, but you also have a balance. Life is balance. You know, there's always a balance on those scales. Every single day running Fears, things go wrong, but things also go right. And if one thing goes better overall, then it's a good day. If one thing goes worse overall, it's a bad day. And I think, you know, I realized I needed to experience that. So I'm talking to my parents about this. And over Sunday lunch, my mum's serving up the roast potatoes. And then in a way that only a mother could say, she goes, well, darling, why don't you restart the family watch company? And you're going, sorry, what? Now, at this point, I'll say most people will go, yeah, sorry, like you must have grown up knowing Fears was in your family, in your blood and all this. And I was going, no. When I applied to work at Rolex, my mother said, oh, how funny, your great-grandfather and his father were both watchmakers. It must run in the blood. But that was it. I got the first bit of the story. So I'm assuming these are, you know, an independent watchmaker in a dusty studio,
just doing
workshop,
repair work. And,
exactly. You know, at the top of a building, you know, very sort of like the film Hugo, you know, that sort of thing. What she failed to say is, oh yeah, they were, you know, watchmakers who, interestingly, they had both, so Edwin trained locally in the west of England. Both of them were sent off as teenager boys to Glashütte to study at the Morris Grossman School of Watchmaking.
Wow.
They were sent on trains, not speaking a word of German or French, to go and learn there. So actually there's this precedent of the MDs of Fears having an actual watchmaking background to it, which I
this is
kind of rather like.
Yeah.
But she'd failed to say it. So of course, if you want a light bulb moment, it does not get better than this. So suddenly I'm going, right, it's 2014. I think I now know what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. But then it was a long 2.5 years, still working at Rolex, and in my lunch breaks, holidays, weekends, desperately trying to work out how I was going to do this. Because people go, oh, well, you work at Rolex, so you know the watch industry. Not at all.
No.
Not at all.
It's a self-sufficient business. It's not like being in the industry at all. I think Rolex, it's its own thing.
And even, you know, what I've learned over the last 7.5 years of running Fears and growing it is one watch company and another are completely different. The way they operate, the way they work, how they make their watches. So I'm having to scramble around. And at this point, there's still not really podcasts about watches. There's very little information. Hodinkey's not much help. And so you're having to go on forums and like, you know, how do you do it? And you realize, well, there's different ways of doing it. You know, one route would be to go to a white labeler, so a company in Switzerland, and we say, look, here's a design, make me a watch. The other route would be to procure all my individual components. And I realized that I wanted to do the latter.
Okay.
And that's something that, you know, this is very sort of inside baseball. This is, you know, behind, you know, we're peeking behind the velvet curtain here.
This is what we like to do in this show, right? This is exactly what we like to do in this show. So
well, hopefully there's more than just some crazy professor pretending to be a wizard. So if you want to do the route we do, you need to not only design the watch, but you also need to create technical drawings.
Yes.
You also need to have a database of suppliers to make the parts. So let me explain. To make a watch like the watch on my wrist, we will work with 20 suppliers.
Okay.
Now, none of them work in the Toyota fashion of just in time.
Yes.
Because you're making a bespoke component for a company.
Yeah.
And we're ordering in small quantities because we're a small company. We make under 1,000 watches a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
So therefore, we often will find our order gets put to the back of the queue. But you've got to try and coordinate all those components to come at the same time to then assemble the watch. But the advantage of this is you're going to a crystal manufacturer to make the crystal, a dial manufacturer to make the dial, a hand manufacturer to make the hand, et cetera, et cetera. These companies specialize in very niche, specific points of manufacture. And therefore, you're dealing with people who, for want of a better phrase, are pure geeks in what they make.
Yep. They're
right?
Product experts in the particular thing that they are expert in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If we went to a white labeler, everything is being done to a cost. Everything's being done for ease.
Yeah.
Our dial maker always says, they said we have such a love-hate relationship with Fears because on the one hand, we love the fact that you always push us with new ideas and new textures and new things that we may not have done before. But we also hate the fact that you're always pushing us to do a lot of R&D and new things. And,
Yes.
But for me, that's part of the excitement because I know a watch isn't just one part. It's made up of all these parts. And so, for example, we get our crystals manufactured in Hong Kong. That's where 99% of sapphire crystals are made. But we go to a very good company, high quality, get the crystals made. The gaskets come from a separate company. We then get the crystals sent from there to a company in Switzerland who all that company does is AR coating. But their AR coating is the stuff used by, the £200,000 brands.
Yes.
Because the AR coating costs 2.5 times the cost of the crystal.
Right.
But this is military grade armored AR coating. So when you put it on the inside and the outside, you're not removing it unless you're using chemicals. Like it is armored on. But it's the best in the business.
Yes.
But it's crazy when you start thinking, we're probably spending over £10 per crystal just to get it coated.
Wow.
And that's one of those things that you go, why is a Fears £3,500? It's because we're going to the experts in each of the fields.
Yeah.
And what we do is when we design a watch, we don't start off going, we want it to be priced around here.
Yeah.
Take off the tax, take off a margin, because shock horror as a company, we have to make profit to develop the new products, pay our suppliers. But then you go, right. No, the way we do it is we go, right. What kind of movement do we want? What kind of case do we want? What kind of dial do we want? And, and we start building it up like that and then we'll put on a margin, then so we work upwards, not downwards.
Right. Okay.
But, here are some of the shocking things. Because of the way we operate, the movement in our watch isn't the most expensive component. Our watch dials cost more than our movements because they are hand finished in Germany by one of the world's best dial makers. And so when you start thinking of it like that, you're going, oh, wait, no, we're using good movements, Le Jeu Parés or ETAs, and then we do all the regulation here in the UK. But the movement's just part of the overall thing. And I think that's something which I've spent 7.5 years learning and going, okay, we have to appreciate that because we're never going to have our own in-house movement. I always say to people when they say, will Fears one day have an in-house movement? I always go, I can have an in-house movement or I can have a watch company because I would have to sell my entire shareholding in Fears to scrape together the pennies to be able to do an in-house movement. And to what end?
Yeah.
Whereas for me, it's going, actually, I want to make something that has a bit more soul. It has a bit more specialness to it. And to do that, you actually have to think in a very British way. It's not about loud, it's not about shouty, but there's a lot of detail in there.
It's fascinating to hear this in how you're explaining it, because you look at the vast majority of the watch world and everything's based around what movement has it got? What movement has it got? What engine is it running? What's inside it? Blah, 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 blah. And very, very few people talk about in such detail the crystal manufacture, which is a huge, important part of the watch. The dials, again, a huge, important part of the watch. Crowns, crown stems, cases, all the other pieces that come in to make this final product. A lot of that gets overlooked.
Yes.
and it's food on the movement. What movement is it? What movement is it? So
isn't that one of those things that it's a very easy thing for people to latch onto because it's very comparable?
Yes, yes.
A watch, the watch on your wrist and the watch on my wrist are both very different. So the first thing you do is go, well, it's about the movement. But something that you and I have spoken about before is I know that I put in an unhealthy amount of effort and time into making a product that doesn't need to exist today.
Yes,
a mechanical watch doesn't need to exist.
Absolutely.
But because it does have a practical function, and that for me is something important, all of the watches we make have to be easily legible. But because it does have a function, people therefore appreciate, right, no, but this is a serious, this isn't a piece of jewelry. My bangle is a piece of jewelry. This is a tool.
Yes.
But I think the reason you wear a watch is there's two things. One is the emotional connection you have to it, because you check the time. What time is, your father, what time was my child born?
Yes.
You'll glance down at your wrist.
Yeah.
Something that's against your skin. It's very, very, very personal. It's very, you build a relationship with this. And unlike your phone, which after a few years, however many upgrades and new batteries you put in it, it's going to have to go.
Yeah.
So why am I building a connection with my iPhone 13 mini? I love it. But I know in a few years, I'll have a new phone.
Yes.
And so there's no point in getting emotionally connected to it. Whereas I know the watch on my wrist, even though it's a prototype and hopefully my head of operations isn't going to ask for it back. But assuming he doesn't ask for it back.
Send it to me.
This is the problem. I end up, because I am quite I'm an old romantic. I'm very sentimental, you know.
Yeah.
But, I sold my entire watch collection to fund the restarting of Fears. So I don't have those watches. I don't have the watch from my wedding day. That's gone, And nowadays the watches I wear tend to be, a prototype mule testing something.
Yes.
And so again, I'll be wearing this watch, bonding with it, traveling around the world, doing incredible things. And then suddenly they're like, oh, we need to break it down because we need parts from it to build another prototype. Anyway, that's, woe betide me. I get to wear amazing watches all the time. But no, the second thing is why do people wear a watch? And I think the best way to sum it up is think of the wristwatch on your wrist, mechanical wristwatch on your wrist, like the shoelace.
Okay.
So we nowadays, as humans, are very clever. We've created things called Velcro and elastic. And they are a far easier way of attaching a shoe to your foot.
Yeah.
And even though I'm not going to pretend to be a sneakerhead, you look at, a pair of Yeezys. They have laces on them. You go into a sneaker shop, they have laces on them.
Yeah.
Where that's outmoded technology. Why do they have it? And there's a thing of sometimes a process of, tying up a shoelace, putting a watch on your wrist and securing it. Not only does it help you bond and connect with something, it's a ritual.
Yes.
But it's also the sophisticated way of doing it. Would you go to a job interview wearing a pair of shoes that have a Velcro strap across the front?
Absolutely not.
Right.
Absolutely not.
And there's that thing of increasingly, and this is what's wonderful to see, and this is why the Apple Watch should be celebrated above all other watches.
Yeah.
It has got a whole generation to put something on their wrist.
Yes.
And get into the habit of looking at their wrist.
Yes.
But what's fascinating, I see increasingly, is, we all know that the younger generation, and I turned 37 this week, so I'm feeling pretty old right now. But, the younger generation of teenagers, they've been having, Apple Watches or smartwatches, but they're beginning to turn away from social media. They're beginning to realize that actually the wonders of digital technology mean that you need a detox. Every Sunday I have my phone turned off.
Right.
Entirely.
Okay.
I turn it off when I go to bed at night. In an emergency, people can contact my husband,
Yeah.
But it means that I'm not getting all those notifications and I can be in the moment.
Yeah.
But this is where it's beautiful to wear a watch because you have the time, you can have the date, but you haven't got all the distractions that go with it.
This podcast is sponsored by zulualphastraps.com. Zulu Alpha Straps make some of the best watch straps in the market, and we do it all here in the UK by hand. As a listener of the Making Time podcast, you can enjoy 15% off on your next order by using the discount code MakingTime15. Your support makes this podcast possible, so please head over to zulualphastraps.com so we can continue to bring you fresh content. Now, back to the show. Yeah, you've nailed it. You absolutely have nailed it. And again, I've said this many times. Cogs and Gears 2024 makes no sense. We develop emotional investment and emotional connections with these pieces, and they go on these journeys with us, and they become part of you. Even to the point where, some people really mother their watches and their collections and try and keep everything pristine and perfect, no scratches, no blemishes. I'm the opposite side of the coin. I quite enjoy having something that's beaten a little bit because I've put that in there. And when my children come to inherit it, and again, this is one of the only items really now in today's day and age that you're probably going to be able to pass on. There's not an awful lot else out there that isn't throwaway technology. But when the kids come to inherit it, they'll look upon it and they'll realize, or they'll remember every holiday we ever went on, or every little trip we did, or whatever we wore. Dad was wearing this watch, and I wonder where that dink came from. I wonder where that scratch came from. I wonder what he was doing when this happened.
Yes,
and there's a romance to that. That's you. Very few things exist in our daily lives now that we can hand off in the same fashion.
Yes,
it's emotionally engaging, and you invest in.
But there then also comes this thing of, modern technology. And if you're working with the suppliers we work with, it's very easy to build a watch that will last several hundred years.
Yes. Yeah.
We can do that relatively easily now.
Yeah.
What's more difficult is to design a watch that people want to wear for several hundred years. And I think this is where running a company with the history that we have, yes, I own Fears, I restarted it, but because my official title is 4th managing director, because the previous 3 were my relatives, I view it as I'm just the current custodian of Fears. There will be a 5th managing director at some point, and a 6th and a 7th. And that means that, people often will talk, the business plan, the 5-year plan. For me, it's what's the 50-year plan?
Yeah, 100%.
And for me, the 50-year plan in 2016, when I restarted Fears, actually had nothing to do with watches. Our vision I set out then, I said, right, what do I want Fears to be? What is the guiding star that will help and have an influence on every little decision we do? And it was very simply that Fears would embody the British success of good capitalism.
Say more on that, mate. Please explain that like I'm an alien from outer space and I don't speak English.
Okay.
Explain what that means.
Okay, so this is a bit of a reaction. I mentioned, doing a degree in economics. And, okay. So while I was studying economics in the mid-noughties, the people we were being taught as being like the absolute, the absolute stars, the masters of the universe, a lot of those people today, those business people, are disgraced.
Okay.
They've lost their knighthoods. And it's that thing of back then, there was very much that's how you grow a big, successful business. It's about profit above everything else.
Yeah.
And for me, it's going, actually, I want to say there is another way of doing it.
Okay.
You give up a few percentage points to work with better suppliers that, as we do, are protecting certain skills and crafts. To hand brush a Fears watch dial, that requires skill. That's not something that you can teach someone in 5 minutes.
Of course,
that's something that takes years to perfect to get it right.
Yeah.
But there's also a thing of like doing right by the people you work with, your suppliers, doing right by your team, my colleagues. But I am also a free market capitalist. I do believe in the capitalist system, but I think it often gets broken with profit and shareholder value being put above all else. So we say, right, what about the other way? The other way is we grow a very successful business. It may not make quite as much profit as it could, but because of its growth, because of its significance in the industry, it means that when other people are going, I want to set up a watch company in Britain, they have an example they can look at and go, actually, rather than just going for, the cheapest product to make as much profit as possible, actually, let's have a look at Fears because they've done incredibly well and they do things with a more ethical, moral standard. Why would they follow you? Because they see that it can be successful.
Of course.
I think that's the thing. People often make the misjudgment that, to actually be decent, you have to be weak or you have to be giving something else up.
Yeah.
And it's going, no, actually, you can have it all.
Yeah.
You just have to make some compromises. In my case, I'd rather give up a few percentage points on margin.
Yeah.
But the balance is I get to sleep well at night with a clear conscience. So, that's the thing. And, I want Fears to be that example that economics students or business students are being taught in the 2060s as an example of this is how you can do it.
Yes.
Now, the only way to do that is to do it over decades.
Yeah, of course.
And, bear in mind today, Fears was founded 178 years ago.
Yep.
So by the point that, I either give up the reins or there's a coup d'etat amongst my team and I get ousted, some sort of military coup will happen, no doubt.
Yeah.
It's also Bristol, I always say with Bristol, give it one hot summer's day and there's a riot somewhere in the city.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
But, at the point where I step down as fourth managing director, I want to ensure I've got a very strong business that is going to be completely outliving me, but also is still true to what it was in the past and what it did in the past.
It's refreshing to hear exactly what you just said. And it's refreshing to talk to or understand a business that are thinking in 50-year cycles rather than 5. Yeah. Because a lot of companies are out there and they're looking for what's available now or what can we do next year or what's coming next quarter or even, if everything goes well in the next 3 years, we'll be there. When you start thinking in longer periods of time, it's astonishing how much of an impact that has on your decision making. This is something I've gone through recently with my business. As everyone knows, my business was an accident that became a thing, and it was no real desire or it wasn't a big plan at the beginning. It was just a hobby that turned into a company. But as time has gone on, as things have progressed, I've looked at it and I've gone, well, I want Z.A to survive 100 years. That's my mark.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to achieve. That, and the minute I made that decision, and the minute I reached that conclusion, it had an immediate impact on my decision making. What are we going to do? Product wise, who do we want to work with?
Yeah.
Where do we want to position ourselves in the market? What sort of space do we want to fill? So on and so forth. Who's the customer base? Where do we exist? Where is the place for Z.A in 50 years' time? It is astonishing just how many businesses don't think that way and don't look forward in such a large period of time.
But what you're describing is the original playbook. Nice business phrase there, the playbook. The playbook for creating a genuine luxury brand.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is nowadays to create a luxury brand, you can do a facsimile, right? You can get a beautiful logo, sans serif, some nice colors, some nice textures, good photography, and there's your luxury brand. Well, let's go back. Why did Mercedes, Rolls-Royce, Rolex, how did they become luxury brands? Hermes, Louis Vuitton. Because back in the day, they made an incredibly high quality product because it had good design, good engineering, good materials.
Yep.
And therefore, they were able to say, this is the best car in the world. This watch can go down, X number of meters and all of this. Nowadays, they've become luxury brands. And, you look at them and I would, without naming names out of that list, I would argue not all of them are true luxury brands. They're not hard luxury. Nowadays, it's a veneer of luxury.
Yes.
But for some of them, they still have that thing of going, luxury comes from quality.
Yes.
And, having spent a morning seeing and having a go and looking at what you do, that is the definition of true luxury.
I appreciate that.
It doesn't have to be a Bond Street. It doesn't have to be a glass of champagne on arrival.
Yeah.
Take note. I would have appreciated
Tyler, please pull one's finger out. We'll get that sorted.
But true luxury is about doing that. And for me, you look at it, Fears is not a luxury brand because our watches start at, £3,000 and go up to 30,000. I like to hope that we will earn the right to be a luxury brand or have that that label put on us in years to come by the fact that we build our watches like a 1980s Mercedes-Benz.
Yes.
It's very understated.
Yes.
But it's rock solid.
Elegantly understated.
Exactly. And that's where the, our registered tagline, elegantly understated since 1846. The elegance, I hope you can see that. And elegance
100%.
isn't just about being dressy. People often think elegance is only about, being in a fancy suit, wearing a hat, drinking a martini. I completely disagree. There can be elegance in wearing a football outfit, right?
Yeah.
You can be rock climbing, but with elegance. It's about how you handle and how you do something.
100%. I've on that, and the word elegance in its own, I've always been a massive fan of boxing. And that's one of the words that I hear a lot when describing certain fighters. They're just elegant in how they do it. It's an art form. Things just flow like water. And it has an elegant. Now, pugilism is, in its essence, a barbaric thing to do, but it can be elegant. So 100% agree. You can have utilitarian things that are massively elegant.
You can tell how much football I watch. I think it's football kit, not an outfit.
I don't know, mate. I'm from Wales. We chase eggs. That's what we do there. I think it's a kit. Yeah, it probably is. It probably is a kit. Yeah. But yeah, you're 100% correct. The elegance can be found in so many ways and forms in so many places. So when you're designing from the bottom up.
Yes.
Right. And you're mindful of the fact that you have certain design language within your range.
Yeah.
You're mindful that one of the main goals is wrong, but something you have to include is an air of elegance to what you do and how you do it. And you go through this process. Aside from the elegance element, what other things are you looking for when you, in your design language, when you're coming up with new things? Because ultimately we want to get to a place in a decade or so, or 5 years, 10 months, wherever it may be, where you would like the label attached of luxury, and rightfully so. So what factors do you include in your design language to get there?
So I think it comes from a basis of the way I view fears and have done for the last 7.5 years. We're very lucky, very fortunate to have this incredible heritage.
Yes.
Now, you have to be very respectful of that. Heritage goes two ways. We could just milk it by putting 1846 on the dial and, all of that. But actually you have to pay, deference to it, which is why the company is based in Bristol. I actually live up in North Yorkshire. Every week I spend 4 or 5 hours on a train each way, traveling between the two cities. I spend most of the week away from home, but we have to be in Bristol because that's where the company should be.
Yes.
And actually across the road from our head office is the Arnos Vale Cemetery, where the previous managing directors are buried. So when I walk past it on the way to going into the work, you just know that they're keeping an eye on what I'm doing, right? But I never wanted it to be a heritage brand.
Okay.
So that means I very much think of Fears as we are a British watchmaking company with heritage.
Right, okay.
A British brand with heritage.
Yes.
Now, we can use the heritage in a very clever way, which is saying, if Fears hadn't closed, what would it be making today? So we do make some models that pay very direct, respect and homage to pieces from our archive. We've got an amazing, extensive archive. Why wouldn't we do that?
Of course, yeah.
But the more difficult, the more clever thing, the thing that, is a bit more of a pain in the arse for us to do is go, actually, how do we make a modern watch that has the essence of Fears, but it's looking forward, not backward?
Yes.
So there are certain key design elements that we start with. So let me talk a little bit about the structure of the company. Today, we're 9 people at Fears, and my team is split in a commercial department that manages sales and our retailers around the world. We have our operations department that manages manufacture, procurement of components. We have our design department where it's designing and CAD engineer. We do that all in-house. And then we also have our marketing department to make sure that people actually know we exist and we do something. And these 4 work very well together. Every week we have a senior team meeting, which I think everyone dreads, where we go through our Gantt charts as a group, the heads of all the departments. We go through it line by line, every project to see whether it's on track. We're always working on lots of things. But where does it begin? Okay, so one of the only things I do in the company, other than taking journalists out for martini lunches and, as I always joke, kissing babies, waving at people and doing selfies, at the coming up British Watchmakers Day, we've put together the schedule for the team and what everyone's doing.
Yep.
And during the setup period, my column literally just says getting in the way. And then when the show opens, it literally just says selfies, autographs. And it's just the Joker going like, what I do fundamentally is I come up with the idea.
Yeah.
The ideas. I'm very lucky to be very creative in that way. I don't have the skill set to turn that idea into a watch. That's why I have an incredible designer who I work very closely with, and we're very in tune. And it's also good to have someone who is the protector of the brand.
Yes.
Because, I'm coming up with ideas, but I've also got, my head of commercial saying this, head of operations saying this. Sometimes you've got to go, the initial idea has to be very pure. You work with a designer who turns it into a reality. Our CAD engineer, Laura, she's fantastic. She then turns that into 3D to work out, how do we make it? How do we build it? If I say this watch has 150 meter water resistant, but I want it to be under 10 millimeters, that's a challenge.
Of course.
But she built a watch that we can test 300 meters because she's that good.
Right.
Then operations take over and they take those design files and they go, right, for this project, we're going to work with that case manufacturer rather than that case manufacturer because they have more skill in this kind of building rather than that building.
Right.
And then you go to the bracelet manufacturer, the strap manufacturer, and our head of operations will then go out to start getting offers and quotes in from all these different places. And then we have to start placing the orders to get prototypes made.
Yes.
And it's always fascinating because when you have that initial mock-up that Lee, our designer, does, that's the most valuable image you can have. It's the image that's the background on my phone and, very precious. Then when you start getting the samples in, when you then get a 3D model, just a render on the screen, that's the most important thing. Then we do 3D printing. Then you get that piece of plastic and that's the most valuable thing. Then you get a metal 3D print. That's even more valuable. Then you go into full prototyping. You've got a watch on your wrist that doesn't work, but it's built to look like a watch.
Of course.
That's the most valuable. And it's very funny because we have a part-time archivist who is very patient, but is very insistent that we keep all of those parts.
100%.
Because that's our modern archive. We're very lucky to have an extensive archive, but this is about being respectful to the legacy. The fifth managing director wants to look back and maybe do, it sounds very grand and very self-congratulatory, but they might want to do a retrospect of the first 10 years of the restart of Fears. They need that information.
Yep.
So then we get the prototype, we run it through all kinds of different tests. And some of those tests are aesthetic. We are building a physical item. How does it feel when you rub your finger around the edge of the case? It's the brushing, the right coarseness. Put it on the wrist. Does it wear well? Does it catch light well? And then from that, we go into pre-production sampling, get those parts. And those watches are always, I'd say about 97% there.
Okay.
So they're now at a level where we can photograph them, but they might have some machining marks that we need to Photoshop out, But at that point, we're ready to start talking to our retailers, our clients, and start, and then we go into full production. So to make a watch is very complex. Absolutely. And also those senior team meetings every week, there'll be some issue or problem that comes up, which requires a compromise. Yeah. And that's where having a very separate design department allows us to mean that they can then interject 6 months after they've had a sign off of a design and go, whoa, hang on. But that's a very important part of the design. So we actually have to push back on the dial maker or the case maker and insist they do it our way or find a way around.
Yes.
Whereas other points they'll go, we can make a compromise here.
Yeah.
I don't like compromising, but I also like running and growing a business. And as I'm always reminded, the most important thing is when you look at the end result, it's got to look like, you've got to look at it and not go, oh, there was a compromise made.
Yeah.
And I mean, a good example is the new Redcliffe that I'm wearing on my wrist. This watch is now launched. We first started in the autumn of 2018 on this project, Project NR. Every project at Fears has a random code name.
Yep.
But Project NR started twice. We got to the point of about to start prototyping. We had 3D metal prints of cases and we discarded it. It was the wrong watch. It wasn't right. And if you read a business book when, you're studying economics or before you run a company, it will always talk about sunk cost.
Yeah.
And you never really understand it until you're sat there going, how many tens of thousands of pounds, not just in prototyping and material, but also in hours of my team and my colleagues working on this, have we spent that we're now literally throwing away and starting afresh? It is the most exhilarating, foolish, and completely worthwhile thing you can do running a business.
I agree absolutely 1,000%. Like the sunk cost is, but this is how you learn. This is how you grow. This is how you develop. And you have to go through these hiccups, these failures in order to get where you want to be. And you have to go through this process. And this is just part of the process.
Yes.
And it's so fulfilling and rewarding when you get there, because you know the journey you've gone on and you know why certain things are the way they are. And it's because, well, we encountered this on the first one or this happened on the second one. And it just makes for a completely different product.
Yes.
It's phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. So you go through this process and you've gone through it twice with the new Redcliffe.
Well, the watch we've launched with is the third iteration,
of course,
on the same project, which is crazy.
Could you give us a bit of an insight on things you've changed from 1 and 2 till you get to 3? Even 2 or 3 examples maybe on.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, okay, so back in 2016, I'm creating the first watch, which was a Redcliffe. It was a quartz watch, and I was very keen that it didn't look like a piece from the archive. Now, I would have made a lot more money. I would have sold a lot more watches if I had just recreated a watch from the archive. But no, I had to be stubborn. I had to forge. And it was important for me that if I was, as I said, Fears is a British brand with heritage, not a British heritage brand.
Of course. Yep.
It's that, that book, Eats, Shoots and Leaves. It's all about where you put the comma and which way round you do it.
100%.
And that first watch, we launched that. And actually, every time we have a launch day of a new watch, I always wear watch number 1, the very first Redcliffe.
Okay.
And I also have breakfast at McDonald's because I was wearing that watch and I had McDonald's breakfast on the day I restarted Fears.
Amazing.
The 3rd of November, 2016. So it's a bit of I said I was sentimental. I'm also a little superstitious,
Yeah.
So, but what I did with that was I looked at the archive and picked out certain things: watch hands, proportions, and shape. And I was like, these are the things that will flow through the Fears collection going forward. So we use what we call the Fears pipette hands, and it's a certain shape of hand. Those hand shape were used from the 1930s to the 50s by Fears. And I've always been very adamant that a good watch design, or actually let's change that, a good watch brand design across their collection, is where if you take the name off the dial, it's a Rolex.
Yes.
It's a Richard Mille.
Yes.
That is the power of good design and good DNA.
Yes.
It's where it's ingrained. It's that way when you meet 2 people and you're like, you're very different, but I can tell you're brothers.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me, it was setting those early things that we still carry through to today. But in 2017, we bring out our mechanical Brunswick, and that very much stole the show. That stole all the light, and that very quickly grew and became the dominant family. And Redcliffe and Brunswick, Redcliffe is named after Redcliffe Street in Bristol, where the company was founded, and Brunswick is after Brunswick Square in Bristol, where the company had its export warehouse. Right. And actually, I mentioned about the exporting to 95 countries.
Yes.
They did so much exporting, they had a branch of the post office within the warehouse.
Wow.
Can you imagine having DHL, UPS sat at the desk next to you in your office?
Wow. And this is going back
This is in the 20s and 30s, And for me, it's that we don't put 1846 on the dial, but it's a nice nod back to it. But the modern thing is that when you ever look, and this is very inside baseball, if you look at a Fears reference number for the model number, if it's a Redcliffe watch, it starts BS1. And that's nothing to do with my initials, Bowman-Scargill. BS1 is the postcode of Redcliffe Street today.
Right.
Brunswick's a BS2. BS2 is the postcode of Brunswick Square today. And so it's that thing of going, you're weaving in the little bit of history and the little bit of Bristolness into every single watch through that. But also, you've got to have a model reference. It's got to be unique.
Got to be something.
But the thing is, let's go back to your actual question, which was about how do we make sure the new Redcliffe isn't, why did we have to throw it away twice to get it right?
Yeah.
The problem is we'd spent so long working on Brunswicks, the new versions of the Brunswick model. We were creating a round Brunswick.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And why are we doing that?
Yeah. Yeah.
What we had to do was go right back to basics and go, no, we need to create the Redcliffe, which is a round watch as opposed to the cushion case Brunswick, but it's got to stand on its own 2 feet. And it kept looking too classic. The Brunswick line has a classic leaning. It's quite traditional in dial layout. It has numerals on the dial, And I was like, no, the Redcliffe has to be batons, loom. It's got to be the contemporary side of the Fears DNA.
Yeah.
And so with that mindset, my incredible designer Lee worked, and almost the first thing he showed me is what we've made. He got it so right, so quickly. But even while we were working on it, we had a prototype of a completely different bracelet design.
Okay.
And I held it and I was like, okay, this is fine. I've spent about £10,000 developing this. And overnight, and we looked at it and we're going, oh, well, we'll change this and change that. And I come in the next day and I just said, guys, I went on a run this morning and all I was thinking is how much I hate this bracelet. Junk it. We're starting again. And they were like, okay, but we can't delay the launch. I said, no, and we have to launch with the watch on its bracelet. It can't launch just on a strap, you know. No offense to making watch straps, but
course,
the watch has got to come all together.
Yeah.
And by lunchtime, Lee had put together the initial options for how the bracelet could be completely redesigned from scratch. And then by the end of the day, working with our CAD engineer, we had 3D technical drawings. And that evening we sent off files. And it was that moment when you realize that's literally what having a team is about.
Yes.
It's about everyone being able to work concurrently, but also everyone realizing the importance.
Of course. Yeah.
And suddenly going, right, we've got to get the new bracelet designed.
Yeah.
And people will say, well, surely it's rushed. No, we have a B2B arm of Fears called Fears Design Studios. We do design and engineering work for other watch brands.
Okay.
I'll be very un-British and unmodest and go, yeah, we're actually pretty good at what we do when it comes to design work. Yeah. So we're able to know when things are right and wrong.
Of course.
There's a wonderful story, which I'll tell very briefly, but it links into why the role I do at first doesn't seem very much, but why it's so important and why the people in my company. I've always hired people to try and be the dumbest guy in the room when we have an all-company meeting. They have to be better at what they do than if I was to do it. There's this great story about a nuclear reactor in the US and it was playing up. It was running inefficient. It wasn't dangerous, but it was just not running right. Yeah. And they tried to fix it, can't do it. And it's losing them tons of money. Anyway, they get in a consultant and he comes in. He's a freelancer, absolute expert in nuclear. And he spends an hour walking around, looking at everything on his own, very quietly. Then he gets out a step ladder, goes up to a dial, gets out a Sharpie, puts a cross on the dial and goes, that's your problem. Adjust that, get that back onto the thing. Everything else will run fine. And guess what? It did. Yeah. Now, the next day, his assistant sends through the invoice, $60,000. And the engineer, the reactor goes, sorry, $60,000 to put a cross on a dial. And the assistant came back and said, no, let me itemize the invoice for you. $1 is putting a cross on a dial. $59,999 is knowing where to put the cross.
Of course, yeah.
And I think that's an important thing when it comes to watch design. Not saying, woe betide me, it's so difficult. I have the best job in the world. I get to create beautiful objects every day. Yeah. But to get it right, and to get it right when you're creating something that you've got to be proud of in 50 years' time, that's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. 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 So where do we go from that? I mean, you've just nailed it essentially in that statement there, mate. But yeah, I mean, the thing I pull out of that is in 50 years' time. That's the important factor there. In 50 years' time, hypes and trends come and go. Things happen. We go back to the early 2000s when we were both younger men, and it was fashionable to have a clock on a belt on your wrist. Yes. Now, not so much. But how do you get it right? And how do you get it right so it's going to sit right in the archives in 50 years' time? That's a really, really important element or thing you have to factor in to the design language, what you do and how you're doing it. So tell me about the new Redcliffe, mate. I believe this is launching today when this podcast goes live.
Absolutely.
Where can people find it? Where can people learn more? Where can people discover more about this piece and this watch?
So always the best place is the website,
Yeah,
or visiting our showroom, but the website, fearswatches.com, or the Instagram, fearswatches, nice and consistent. And I think, a point to look at when you look at this watch is think of it in terms of, is this a Fears I want to own? But more importantly, is this a watch that I think I could be wearing and enjoying through those moments, the promotions in a few years' time, a pay rise next year, birth of a child, a marriage, a wedding, the significant, the happy, the sad. I think that's the thing when you look at a watch is is this the watch that I can wear and enjoy like that?
Yeah, of course.
Hopefully that will be correct.
Fantastic. Well, Nick, thank you so much, mate, for coming in today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me.
Guys, please head over to Fears on Instagram and on the website. Discover what Nicholas and his team have been up to. And again, thank you ever so much, mate. And as things progress, I hope we can welcome you back to talk about new things and other things you've got in the pipeline.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Till next time.